Okay guys, so welcome back to the 3D Muscle Journey question and answer series. We are doing this one live in the kitchen, which happens to be my office. Well, not live, but we're in the kitchen, and I didn't want to go to the back room and do the whole chalkboard thing. I like the kitchen because I can eat and work at the same time, and that's what this question is about. This question is about refeeding or having a high day. So let's go through it. What is an optimal way to incorporate refeeds during a cut? How do you know you need a refeed? And whole day versus a few hours, weekly versus every 2 weeks versus every fourth day, and how many carbs? Okay, so let's see. Where do we start with this? Well, and I had a video earlier about using carbohydrates when you are dieting, and again, carbs themselves, they play a huge part in keeping you metabolically a bit healthier during a caloric deficit. Okay, so someone who is dieting on 50 grams of carbs versus someone who is dieting on 200 grams of carbs, the person on 50 will surely see some fat loss, but they'll probably have a harder time sustaining that over the course of a long time, over the course of a longer diet. And the person who's on 200 grams of carbs, and again, these are just examples, that they surely won't be losing fat as rapidly as a person who is on 50 grams. I mean, nothing is better when it comes to fat loss than a ketogenic diet. But the big issue, the catch-22 when it comes to a ketogenic diet, is the fact that the fat loss is short-lived, and then eventually your body adapts, and it becomes really hard to make any kind of progress thereafter. So one thing that I suggest, regardless of how you want to diet, whether it be with really low carbs or using moderate amount of carbs, is that you do, with some regularity, have some sort of higher carb day, which is known as a refeed. As far as how often and when do you need it, well, here's the thing. Again, we talked about keto and how keto, you lose fat really well, but at a certain point it stops. So if you're doing a mini cut, in most cases I would say that chances are you don't know. You don't need a refeed or a high day, because chances are it's going to be 3 to 4 weeks. However, there are some people out there who metabolically they adapt a little bit quicker than others, and typically it's women or Eric Helms. So metabolisms, like for example, Eric Helms, even in a short in and out fat loss phase, 4 or 5 weeks, something like that, I would still have at some day we would have to have some high days to keep him from metabolically downgrading too much. So for mini cuts, it's kind of optional, and it kind of depends on the person. For extended fat loss phases and for contest prep diets, that is when it comes in handy, because anyone can lose fat fairly well at first, but it gets tricky once you're hovering near the lower end of your body fat set point. So let's compare whole day refeeds versus a few hours. I think, first of all, whole day versus a few hours, that is, I don't really know what you mean by that, but I'm guessing you're just saying, have all your carbs in a small window versus, throughout the day, or just steadily having them as you go, maybe adding a little bit to each meal. And I think that's going to be more of a personal preference type thing. I know for me, when I'm dieting and I'm on my high carb day, the extra food seems to stimulate my appetite. So for me, I like to actually have smaller meals and maybe have a few meals in the day that have a bigger impact in, I guess, me just feeling like for once I have some form of satiety, although it does disappear at some point when you're dieting, especially when you're contest prep dieting. But whether you have them throughout the whole day or just kind of have them in one meal, I think that kind of sort of depends on you. And one thing I will say is that I know for me, I like having them in 2 to 3 meals during my high days, simply because I feel that I think for once, it's satiating, and a caloric deficit in its own way, it's kind of stressing. I think more mentally than physically, but it just kind of gives you that moment, right? Now, weekly versus every 2 weeks versus every 4th day. I think every 2 weeks is something that I've never personally tried. I've done every 10 days or so, and this is usually with someone who was way beyond their set point. They most likely were perma bulkers whose situation I inherited, and there wasn't really much of a need for a high day, simply because they were carrying so much more fat than they needed to, and the high day was more there to quench the psychological aspect of dieting. Weekly versus every 4th or every 3rd day, every 5th day, I think that depends. I think one is going to depend on the person and just how often they need a pick-me-up. I think early on in an extended fat loss phase, having a high day on a weekly basis works pretty well, because you can go 6 straight days with some form of deficit. But the longer you diet, sometimes the better it is to just have a little pick-me-up, not just for training, but again for psychological reasons at that point. So it's kind of case dependent. I think at first you're going to have more success having 6, 7 straight low days, and then finally a high day. And then the deeper you get into your fat loss phase, obviously the more you're going to depend on carbs to just get up out of your seat. So it's kind of nice to have that little break every 3rd, 4th, or 5th day. And again, it's also besides just what's best for fat loss and you mentally, what seems to have a more positive effect on your training and when training under a caloric deficit. In terms of how many carbs, I think that is very relative to how many carbohydrates you diet on. But then again, it isn't. I know with Eric Helms, for example, his low days are really low, but then his high days are pretty high. And again, it's because his metabolic rate is so adaptive, and it knows when we're on to something right away. So it's really important that we have those high days that typically on someone who's dieting on 150, 125 grams of carbs, you just wouldn't see. So I think a lot of it has to do with trial and error. I think a good rule of thumb is that if you are having your high day, and your high day is coming every week, if it's taking you more than 2 to 3 days to recover or get right back near your lows, then chances are you're having too many carbs on that day. If you're having a high day every 3rd or 4th day, maybe every 5th day, I would say that 1 or 2 days max, and you want to be right back to right around that area that you were at before you decided to have your high day. So again, refeeds and high days, it's a wonderful way to make sure you have long-term sustainable fat loss. Many cuts you don't need it. And again, these are just kind of general guidelines. I think the best way to figure this out is to just really try it. And this is a good place to start. But again, you might be Eric Helms, and you might need these super high days that are very contrasting to your low days in order to make long-term fat loss happen. So that is it for this one. And next one, I outsource it to Helms, and he promises that this time you'll have quality audio. But again, thank you guys. Again, I really enjoy doing these because it helps out a lot of people, and I think YouTube is a wonderful way to just unite. And thank you guys for so far keeping it really positive on our channel, and that's really appreciated. And it's cool because it definitely means that, man, we attract the right kind of people. So thanks, guys.